Welcome to the UAS Ketchikan Campus Library. This is Ask UAS, where Ketchikan finds answers. And tonight we have Dr. Charmaine Lewis, who's going to be talking to us about vitamin D. First, I have a couple of PSAs. One is you can get a library card at UAS Ketchikan and check books out from us. Whether you're a student, staff, faculty, or a member of the public, if you're 18 and older, you're welcome to come up and get a card. Next, Ask UAS is in April. It's April 25th, and we are doing a session with Tammy Davis from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to talk about invasive European green crab. And then also to let you know, on Wednesdays at 3 in the afternoon, we have a film series, and in April we are going to be showing films on authors, so biographies on authors in April. And so now I'd like to introduce Dr. Lewis. She got her Bachelor of Science in Cell Biology from the University of California, Davis, and has a PhD in genetics, also from UC Davis, where she researched DNA interactions between host and virus pathogens. After completing the doctorate program, Dr. Lewis taught biology and scuba diving at California State University, Monterey Bay for 6 years. She took a break from academia to work for 2 years as a dive safety officer for the Monterey Bay Aquarium. She joined us here at UAS Ketchikan in the fall of 2021 as an assistant professor of science. So welcome, Dr. Lewis.
Thanks, Kathy. All right, well, this talk that let me see if I can get the first slide of it to show up here.
It's kind of activates the scene.
Yeah.
It needs to be turned on.
But anyways, as we're kind of working out our technical
Is it on?
difficulties, which always seem to delay a lot of talks for us, right? So one thing I wanted to just start with was one of the classes that I do teach here at UAS Ketchikan. It's an online course, asynchronous, is the science of nutrition. And that covers a whole bunch of different areas about nutrients, macronutrients, micronutrients. But if tonight's discussion about vitamin D just gets you really excited and interested to know more about nutrition in general, definitely consider looking up that course that I teach. I teach it in fall and in spring, and it's online, asynchronous, and we go into way more depth about vitamin D and vitamin C, vitamin K, protein, carbohydrates, fats, all those different aspects of what we eat. But for tonight, I decided to focus on vitamin D because it's really so critical for our whole nation and probably globally as well. It's becoming extremely deficient in a lot of folks, and certainly living here in Ketchikan and in Southeast Alaska, probably the whole state of Alaska in general, a lot of folks here are really low in their vitamin D. So I thought it might be a good topic that might be kind of accessible and interesting to most people. So I'm going to briefly, in the time that we have together, go through the what, where, and why about vitamin D. So to start us off, really kind of defining what vitamin D actually is, and I have this image of this bottle with these like pills up here, which is kind of misleading because not everything in life is found in a pill, but vitamin D can be found in a pill form. However, it's actually a little bit of a misnomer to even call it a vitamin. So it's more appropriately referred to as and I put it in quotes, a conditional vitamin. And that's because we actually make it on our own. So our bodies are able to produce this on our own. We don't need, theoretically, and I'll get into the details of the theoretically here in a minute, but theoretically we don't need it from a pill or a food. We actually, our skin cells make it just all on our own. And so that's why it's referred to as conditional sometimes. And then even more accurately would be to call vitamin D a pro-hormone. So it's actually a precursor to a hormone, which kind of puts it in a whole other category in our heads if we think about it more as a hormone as opposed to a vitamin. And I'll get more into kind of how is it acting as a hormone and all of those details here in just a second. But we can start thinking about vitamin D less as a vitamin, more as an actual precursor to a hormone. And I mentioned that our skin makes vitamin D. That's pretty cool. So just all by itself, our epithelial cells in our skin, they are adapted to take in sunlight. So UV rays from the sun come in and convert a molecule into what we call commonly vitamin D. So if you are super into chemistry, then you can like geek out on the image that's on the slide for this that has the chemical structure. If chemistry is like really frightening and maybe not something you want to focus on, don't worry about it. But it's showing this kind of a quick, condensed version of the reaction. So on the left.
What's the molecular weight?
Oh yeah, so the question is what's the molecular weight, and I don't know that information off the top of my head. Yeah. So on the left part of the equation, we've got 7-dehydrocholesterol, which then is converted into vitamin D3, which is called cholecalciferol. Again, the names, you don't need to get lost in it, but what's important is our skin does it using the sunlight, and it also uses a form of cholesterol. So that's kind of important too, because we need to remember that our body needs cholesterol as part of our diet. I think in years past, fats and cholesterol like eggs, egg yolks kind of got demonized, and a lot of focus that it was bad. But however, you can actually be deficient in cholesterol, which would lead to you being deficient in vitamin D, because your body can't produce enough vitamin D using sunlight because it needs that precursor, the cholesterol. And then the other thing I have on this slide before I move on is this kind of very general recommendation of 10 to 30 minutes of midday sun several times a week. So I say very general because each individual body is different, and we'll go into a few of those details here in a minute. But also midday sun in Ketchikan looks pretty different than midday sun, say, in Los Angeles, California, right? So it's, but something that the medical field has come out with is that our skin does need to be exposed to midday sun, which is the most strongest level of rays is midday, a few times a week. We need that sunlight exposure to produce this vitamin D. So awesome, our skin can kind of do this on its own. However, the plot kind of thickens here, and there's some ways that vitamin D is not made in our skin quite as efficiently, and that's when UV light is reduced. So some things I assume some folks didn't know is sunscreen actually blocks your ability to make vitamin D. So on one hand, helps you from being sunburnt, perhaps reduces some skin cancer occurrences. However, every time you've got sunscreen on your exposed skin, you're not going to be able to make vitamin D. So just something to keep in mind when the previous slide, it said you need to expose 10-30 minutes, midday sun, several times a week. If you're completely head to toe covered in sunscreen, you actually will not be getting the benefits of the UV light and the vitamin D being produced. So we've seen actually, globally kind of on a bigger picture that the vitamin D deficiencies have increased since the advent of sunscreen, where folks are really being covered in sunscreen or wearing large hats and head to toe kind of covered with shirts and pants. So something to keep in mind. And then another way that UV light is reduced is the amount of melanin in your skin. So this image I've got up here on the slide, we've got folks with kind of different pigments of skin, and melanin is the pigment that's found in your skin. And we all have it. You inherit it genetically, and also your brain actually can produce more pigment, more melanin with sun exposure up to a certain extent. So that's kind of a whole topic for another night's discussion, some kind of neat stuff with pigment and melanin in our skin. However, what that means is different folks need to pay attention to their vitamin D levels in a different way than other folks. So, for example, if you have a lot of melanin in your skin, meaning you have a lot of pigment, you have a darker skin tone, you actually need more sunlight So you need more time in the sun. That melanin, that pigment molecule that's found in your skin cells, blocks the UV rays. And that's a great thing when humans originally kind of were living where they evolved, and before we started to have like global travel, and now we have people living all over the world, right, which is awesome. But what that means is you have folks, for example, my husband's got darker pigmented skin, and he lives here in Ketchikan. So unfortunately, he doesn't get a whole lot of sunlight the way he would if he was living, for the third point on my slide, closer to the equator. So that melanin is a great protectant against sunburn and cancer, but it means those individuals need to spend more time in the sun to get the same amount of vitamin D that someone who has less pigment or melanin in their skin does, who is better adapted to northern climates, right? So now that we know that information, okay, we need to be in the sun to get vitamin D. However, we all live in here in Ketchikan, where it's raining and foggy and cloudy often many days. And you even take into account the fact that in the wintertime, our intensity of sun, even midday, is nowhere near the intensity of the sun midday as it would be at a more southern latitude. So science, the studies have shown that actually even if we were to go outside without sunscreen, without long jackets and hats and gloves, if we could somehow tolerate the cold in January and expose our skin to sun, we still wouldn't get enough to make a proper amount of vitamin D to be healthy. So that's kind of a conundrum there. And then folks, as I mentioned, who have more of that melanin in their skin, who have more pigment, they're especially at risk of being low in vitamin D living somewhere like Ketchikan. In fact, it's kind of surprising to me, but when I looked up the research, the latitude where they really, medical professionals start to become concerned is actually 37 degrees north, which is pretty, I was shocked. I thought it would be further north, and here we are we're at 55 in Ketchikan. So we're kind of way above that threshold of, okay, where you're not getting enough natural sunlight, even if you were going outside and spending quite a bit of time with exposed skin several times a week. So what's the solution? Because humans are here, living here healthily. Some of us have good amounts of vitamin D, maybe others of us need more. Interestingly, this was quite a long time ago, so the years seem to go by for me. So it's 2023, so over 100 years ago, this was in 1918, some scientists actually cured a disease in dogs. So I've got the picture. Also, I like the idea that the solution is always dogs. Dogs are the solution to everything in life. Maybe I'm just because I'm a dog lover, but in 1918, these scientists had these dogs that had a disease called rickets. So I know, like my grandparents' generation, great-grandparents' generation knew what rickets was. I would say a lot of younger folks nowadays maybe have never heard of it. What it is a disease of the bones. So it's when bones don't mineralize properly during development or even just during growth. So throughout our lifespan, our bones are being remodeled all the time. That's a normal kind of natural process. And to do that, you need calcium and phosphorus to be kind of set into the bones. What happens is if you don't have enough calcium and phosphorus going into the bones, they start to like bow outward from gravity and the weight of the body. So just the pure mass of the body and the gravity kind of pulling on it, the bones will start to bend and bow out, which causes a whole bunch of joint pain issues, other problems, as you might imagine. So these scientists had these dogs that have rickets, and humans can also, all mammals can get this disease, rickets. They cured it using cod liver oil. So that's another name I think that my grandparents and great-grandparent generation were very familiar with, cod liver oil. And perhaps some of you here tonight or listening in on the recording have also heard of cod liver oil and have like PTSD about the taste of it, which is pretty strong. But it's fascinating that these scientists were able to cure this disease by adding a dietary element to the dog's diet. I would imagine the dogs probably loved cod liver oil if they're anything like my dog. She loves fish. So that means cod liver oil is a huge source of vitamin D. And we'll go into here in a few slides why vitamin D and skeletal health, so the idea of the bones bending, why that happened. But it turns out our solution can be in our foods, especially ours, all humans, but certainly those of us living in Southeast Alaska. And the kind of thought experiment that was helpful for me to, even before doing some of the research on this, is imagining what the peoples who lived here well before modern times. So there's been folks living obviously in Southeast Alaska, all of our indigenous populations of people, and they didn't have vitamin D in a pill form, in a bottle, right? Then that didn't exist. And yet they had the same amount of sunlight that we have now. It's not like it was, tropical and sunny in Ketchikan hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but they were healthy and thrived. And so if you think about the foods that they were eating in high amounts back then, it would have been a lot of those wonderful fish that we've got here locally. So all those cold water fatty fish like salmon, like sardines, the herring, mackerel, those are all great sources of vitamin D. Our friend cod liver oil. So the indigenous peoples would have eaten all the organ meats from the animals and fish that they were harvesting, and they would have gained the benefits from that. Nowadays we can buy it in a bottle or in a pill form for cod liver oil. Also more modern has been the invention of actually fortifying milk. So, and I'll get into more here in a second about what does that mean to fortify the milk, but they're artificially adding in vitamin D to the cow milk, dairy milk that we drink. So that is a source of vitamin D you can get at the grocery store. Eggs are a wonderful source too of vitamin D. Butter, particularly if the cow ate grass. So the grass is absorbing sunlight and doing photosynthesis and creating vitamin D actually in the grass. But humans, I don't know about you, but we don't digest grass well, so I wouldn't try to go eat a bunch of grass as your source of vitamin D. We don't have the right digestive system for that. But cows do. They have a great way of breaking that down, and then they make this lovely product we call butter that has the vitamin D in it. And then the last on my list here, liver, I think is the most underappreciated food. Again, it has a super strong flavor. Again, is maybe a food you think of like your grandparents or great-grandparents is eating. If you ever wanted the most packed nutrients though in one item, liver. So liver is the best source for vitamin D, vitamin A, zinc, iron. If your iron levels are low, liver's got it. Liver's got it all. It's just the flavor, I think, that turns a lot of people off. So you can get creative with your cooking and find ways to kind of sneak in some liver. And then before I switch slides, if what you might be noticing as you look at this list, sardines and salmon and cod liver oil and butter, eggs, all of these foods are actually high in fat. They're all high in hopefully folks maybe have heard in the news or social media, the omega-3 fats, these healthy fatty acids. So I think that culture shift is starting to change from demonizing fats to like realizing, oh yeah, we actually do need these in our diet. They are healthy at healthy levels. And all of these foods are high in those omega-3 healthy fats. And that's fantastic because vitamin D is fat soluble. So what that means is there's a lot of vitamins out there, and they kind of fall into these two categories, either water soluble or fat soluble. Let's see, an example of a water soluble vitamin would be, like vitamin C is water soluble. The whole suite of vitamin Bs, there's a lot of vitamin Bs. You see them labeled sometimes as like vitamin B6, B12. Those are all water soluble. Vitamin D is fat soluble. So vitamin A is fat soluble, D is fat soluble, vitamin K, vitamin E. What that means is that they dissolve well in fat and they're stored in fat, both in our bodies but also in like the animals that we eat, like the salmon and mackerel in the cow. So also a way to think of that is your cells, for you to kind of take in nutrients in your body to use them, ultimately they have to cross over a cell membrane. In fact, usually they have to cross several cell membranes as they're moving through your intestines and your digestive tract and kind of moving into the bloodstream. And your cell membrane is made of fat. So for certain things to cross over, sometimes they need help if they're water soluble because they can't cross that fat barrier. However, vitamin D loves being in fat, it dissolves well in fat, so it can cross our cell membrane easily. Practically speaking too, if you are taking pills to get your vitamin D, and you're not relying on the sun because you live in Ketchikan, or you aren't eating enough natural foods that have, like the salmon and the eggs that have vitamin D, but if you are taking it in a pill form, be sure to take it while eating fat. So if you take your vitamin D in the morning, make sure your morning meal your toast has butter on it. You put some avocado in there, you eat some seeds or nuts. So it can be plant fat, animal fat, but just make sure that you're getting fat in with that vitamin D for the optimal absorption. Otherwise your body it doesn't absorb it quite as well. Now, to get kind of a little more detailed into the chemistry, but not scare everybody away or maybe excite you if you're into chemistry, but there are two different forms of vitamin D. So, and they're not quite equal. So there's, generically speaking, they're called D2 and D3. So D2 is the ergocalciferol, D3 is the cholecalciferol. D2 is found in some mushrooms. Unfortunately, D2, and I'll tell you why in a second, unfortunately D2 is the form that's found in most fortified foods, so like fortified milk. It's also found in a lot of the supplement pills for vitamin D. And I say unfortunately because it's actually less usable to our body. So your body can still get some of the benefits if you're taking D2, but it doesn't, studies have shown that it doesn't really raise our blood levels of the active form of D2. So part of the processing of vitamin D is it goes through our liver and our kidneys, and I didn't want to, we have kind of limited time tonight, so I wasn't able to go into all the details for what the liver and kidneys are doing. But a short form explanation would be that D2, our liver just can't process it quite as easily, and it takes a lot more energy input from our body to be able to use it. It's not in a chemical structure that's quite as favorable to our body. Whereas D3, this is the form that our skin makes. So the natural, with the sunlight coming in and we just go out and sunbathe and make vitamin D all by ourselves, that's D3. And it's a very favorable reaction. And if you aren't a chemistry nerd, what favorable reaction means is it doesn't take a whole bunch of energy input for it to happen. It just flows, it just happens effortlessly by our cells. Other chemical reactions are not favorable. They take a lot of energy to make it happen. It's like pushing a ball up a hill versus letting it just roll down the hill with gravity. So D3 is the one that our skin makes. It's the one that if you take D3 pills, it actually does efficiently raise your blood levels of calcifidiol, which is the active form of vitamin D. And D3 is the one that you find in the salmon and in the cod liver oil and in the butter and the eggs and all those kind of natural sources of food, forms of D3. And if you look carefully, you can find it in the supplements and pills. So if you do have a choice, if maybe there's a cost difference, but I think I've seen both comparable costs. But if you do have a choice and you're going to the store and buying, or on Amazon or wherever you get your vitamin D pills, check that it's D3 and go with that option if you do have, if it's available to you. That one's just used by our body a little bit more efficiently. And then I included this like balancing rocks thing because I think that old saying that everything in moderation, that's true in all areas of our lives and in our diet for sure. And it was a reminder to me too that there are other things that are interacting with vitamin D. So if you are experiencing symptoms of vitamin D deficiency and you're like, well, I'm taking all these great pills, I'm eating a lot of salmon, but I'm still having problems with vitamin D levels, it could be that these cofactors that I have listed up here, you may be deficient or low in those. And what a cofactor is it's essentially a small molecule that is necessary to assist an enzyme or a hormone, in this case a hormone/vitamin, to do its job. So cofactors sometimes are necessary for the next step in the reactions that vitamin D is going to go on and do in our body. So the ways that vitamin D goes and acts, it needs vitamin A there too. It needs magnesium, it needs vitamin K, boron, zinc. Those are all cofactors for vitamin D. So if you go to your doctor and get your vitamin D levels checked, another interesting thing might be to check those other levels, or at least make sure you've got those other cofactors included in like a multivitamin that you take or something like that. The awesome thing though is from that previous slide with the salmon and the herring and all that, they all have these cofactors already in them. So salmon is such a great source. Also vitamin A and our friend liver that you guys all made faces about. But liver is a great source of vitamin A, and it's in a synergistic balance already with vitamin D. So it's nature packaged it nicely for your body to absorb and utilize all those nutrients. So I would say if you are taking pill forms only as your source to get vitamin D, you do need to kind of check, keep in mind all those other factors that are balancing everything out in our bodies. They're important there too. And I wanted to move on to, okay, so we kind of have an idea of what vitamin D is and where we can get it from. But I wanted to quickly go through, and I know quickly, and I've got all this detail on the slide, and the next few slides have quite a bit of detail, but the idea of why do we need it. And I picked just a few areas, and one of the top ones is skeletal health. We talked about rickets disease and the bones kind of bowing out and bending. And this graphic here, it's really showing how vitamin D coordinates with a hormone that comes out of our parathyroid gland. So the parathyroid gland, kind of up near your thyroid in your neck, makes a hormone called PTH. And that, in concert with vitamin D, they are monitoring, they're helping to raise calcium levels in our blood. So our brain knows when our blood levels don't have enough calcium. And when they don't, it's going to pull it from your small intestine, so the foods that you're eating, and it's actually going to pull it out of your bones. So when you don't have enough calcium in your blood, your body pulls it from your bones. And that's okay. That's a part of the normal homeostasis balance. That's part of your body balancing everything. Also, it'll send it back into the bones. So when your brain detects, oh, we've got enough calcium in the blood, it'll put it back into the bones so they stay strong. So it's a cycle, which is kind of indicated with the arrows here. And vitamin D plays a big role in that cycle. And if you're wondering why calcium is needed in the blood, again, that's like a whole other night of topic, or you can sign up for my anatomy physiology class. We talk about it in there. But calcium's a big one for muscle contraction, for example, and other functions in your body. And then moving away from the skeletal health, I know that, again, these slides have a lot of detail, but my thought was if you're watching on the recording, or even if you're here in person tonight, and you want to go back to the recording, you can pause on this image and you can kind of like take it all in your own time. But what I wanted to focus on here was the aspect of immune health, which is kind of big on a lot of our minds the last few years with this new kind of novel virus coming out there in the world and affecting a lot of people. And if you haven't followed studies with COVID-19 and vitamin D, you should. That was kind of a major factor that a lot of doctors found folks deficient in vitamin D were hit a lot harder by this virus. And one of the reasons for that, I can get my little pointer to do, was that it turns out that, and this is kind of fairly new research actually that's come out, that a lot of our immune cells have receptors for vitamin D. And they found that these immune cells, and if you look on the slide here on the far right, there's these 4 different immune cell types. They're white blood cells. So it's lymphocytes, the monocytes, neutrophils, and dendritic cells. So those are 4 types of white blood cells, immune cells. And without getting into the whole adaptive immune system, that how these cells do their job is they have to kind of go through a maturation process. They go through a developmental process, and they do that throughout your lifespan. So it's not like it's something that happens when you're a baby and then you're done. These immune cells, they have to kind of go through this maturing process, and then they become a fully functional white blood cell, immune cell that can go out and attack viruses and bacteria. To do that maturation process, researchers found that they need vitamin D. So if you don't have vitamin D or you're deficient in vitamin D, you don't have the same numbers of these cells, and they're not maturing properly. So they're not like in their fully functional adult kind of state is a way to think about that. So that's some really cool, more new-ish research that's come out, is this connection between vitamin D and boosting our immune health. And then also new research, new-ish, in the last like 10 years or so, is the connection to mental health. And again, I know this is a busy slide with a lot happening on it. If you're watching the recording, you can pause and then check this out and kind of take it all in. But some cool areas that I found interesting in mental health and vitamin D is they've shown that vitamin D seems to regulate neurotransmitters. So if you're not sure what a neurotransmitter is, you're in luck, because I did an Ask UAS last year that would still be found on our YouTube channel, all about the brain and how the nervous system works and what neurotransmitters are. But for tonight's purposes, let's see, the way you can think of a neurotransmitter is it's the communication signal that happens between two nerve cells that are coming together. So it jumps that gap, that synapse between two nerve cells. So that's a neurotransmitter. It's how nerves communicate to each other. And that's nerves in your brain, nerves throughout your body. The whole nervous system depends on these neurotransmitters. And your mental health, your mood, or if you feel happy and positive, or if you feel depressed and sad, that's dependent on the types of neurotransmitters and how much of them your brain is making. And it looks like vitamin D, from the research, they're showing that vitamin D regulates those neurotransmitters, meaning you might make more, I think a more common name, some folks might have heard of serotonin, so like as a happy neurotransmitter signal in our brains. Vitamin D is helping control the formation of serotonin, meaning more vitamin D, more serotonin, a happier kind of mood state. So that's huge to me. Like the problems that we have, I think, again, as not globally and as a nation, and certainly in Alaska with depression and mental health, how amazing if it just was like, maybe we need to take a little more vitamin D, maybe we need to pay attention to our diets a little more and raise up those vitamin D levels and support that nervous system health. And then my catch-all slide here is just like, there's all these other areas that I didn't quite want to fit in for time considerations tonight. But they're starting to show with vitamin D that it has to do with cell cycle regulation. If it's been a long time since you took high school biology and you don't know what cell cycle is, that's, if you remember the words mitosis and meiosis, so it's the cell dividing to make other cells. So when our cells divide and make two daughter cells, and they do that for, tissue renewal or wound repair and lots of reasons in our body, vitamin D plays a role in that. Vitamin D plays a role in our endocrine health. So endocrine system is our system that makes hormones, that regulates all the hormones in our body that regulate digestion, that regulate reproductive health, that regulate our mental state. Hormones do a lot with our metabolism. So it looks like vitamin D plays a role with that. They've shown vitamin D, actually, because I just yesterday morning was reading a really cool research article that doctors were really high doses of vitamin D, which sounded kind of scary, but they were doing clinical trials with patients who had autoimmune diseases, and they were able to reverse the autoimmune disease with only using high levels of vitamin D. Wow. So I'm not recommending that you go out and take really high levels of vitamin D without the care of a medical physician. But that's some neat research that's coming out right now. Same for diabetes, which is a kind of a form of autoimmune as well. So vitamin D is shown to, vitamin D deficiency is heavily correlated with diabetes. Dementia and some other cognitive disorders are benefiting from higher doses of vitamin D. Also cancer. So this is kind of a big deal, kind of an important vitamin. really more of a pro hormone, as we said. So definitely something to pay attention to in your own health and talk to your doctor about. And that was kind of I was thinking about my final take-home message here, and ultimately, so I have a doctorate, and that's not the same as an MD, so all my advice here tonight, I should have probably started with that, is just, this is the science behind it, this is the information that's out there, and definitely go talk to your medical professionals about, your own kind of individual state, and talk to them about testing your vitamin D. I think the test is fairly cheap, and or health insurance should cover it, and find out where you're at, because as we discussed earlier, you may have reasons that even if you're taking the same supplement that your friend or family member is, your levels might be different than theirs because of the pigment of your skin. It could be, there's a lot of factors that even if you're taking in vitamin D, if your gut health, your digestive health is not at 100%, you're not going to be able to absorb that vitamin D correctly. So you might just be kind of flushing it out of your system because you've got maybe some other problems going on that would be worth looking into. So definitely test, find out kind of what level you're at and see where you need to go with it. And then if you are wanting to increase your vitamin D, I know we're in Ketchikan, but try to get out there and enjoy some time in the sun. Preferably without sunscreen, so expose your skin as much as you can within the safety of warmth and cold here, and then kind of focus on eating some of those healthy foods we talked about, the herring, eggs, butter, salmon, fortified milk has vitamin D, and then consider a supplement. And if you do go with a supplement, go with the D3 form if you can find that one. Then, last thought before, definitely would love to hear any questions that folks might have. I put a couple of old advertisements up here. They made me laugh partly. And then also just kind of, reiterating that cod liver oil. And so on the left, you've got this looks like a mother and a child, and got a cold at your house and your family needs Scott's Emulsion, the cod liver oil tonic, and it helps get rid of the colds they have and builds them up against new ones. And it seems like a silly, super old-fashioned advertisement, but it turns out they were right. The cod liver oil has great combinations of vitamin A, vitamin D, it's got those cofactors, it's got the fat already in it that'll help you absorb the vitamin D. So cod liver is an awesome one if you can get your hands on it. And then on the right is another, again, old advertisement. It's got this baby in the baby carriage. And I love that it had orange juice and cod liver oil, which sounds like the most disgusting combination of flavors. But I think they were getting at vitamin C, which is found in the orange juice. And then the cod liver as far as fortifying the immune system. And last thought, and I'll take some questions after that, was just that I think humanity just amuses me sometimes, which is maybe a good thing as opposed to it making me feel depressed. But I think it's interesting that sometimes research and the medical field, sometimes they get things wrong. That happens all the time. We have many instances in our history where they were wrong and we found out the correct answer to something at a later date. And then other times they're right, and then we forget about it, I think, as a culturally or something else, we shift away from it. So this idea that households used to have cod liver oil and give it to their children, and that was a healthy way to get vitamin D, especially if you live in these northern latitudes. And then it kind of fell out of favor, and quit being used. But maybe we need to bring back the cod liver oil here in Ketchikan somehow. So yeah, with that, I really appreciate the folks who came out tonight to listen. And if you're listening in on the recording, thanks for tuning in to an Ask UAS. And if there's any questions in the room, I'd be happy to answer them. Went through things kind of quickly.
So no questions on the recording, just FYI. Nobody's chatted in yet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Questions in the room? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned melanin, and how is that related to the term melanoma?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just so the speakers pick it up, so the question is, how is the term melanin related to melanoma? So melanoma is a skin cancer, and we have melanocytes. They're a type of skin. So our skin has lots of different cell types in it. One of them is a melanocyte, and they make melanin. They make the pigment, and they can become cancerous, and that's called melanoma. So it's the cancer is named after the cell type that is cancerous. Yeah. So they are related. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
I'm wondering, the satellites, the full spectrum lights, do those impact vitamin D levels?
Yeah, so the question is about the like sad, happy, the mood lights that we can buy, and you can kind of, especially in the wintertime here in Alaska, you can turn on, and how do they affect vitamin D? So unfortunately they don't. So it's UV light, and I've also had the question before about like tanning beds, if that affects vitamin D, and it's not the right wavelength of light, unfortunately. You get that from the sun. What the mood light is doing, because vitamin D has been shown to affect mood, but what the mood light's actually doing is a different system in our body. So our eyes, the retina in our eyes takes in wavelengths of light, and in bright light, like blue light spectrum, comes in and it actually goes, we have a gland in our brain called a pineal gland, and that kind of information relay goes in and creates our awake hormone kind of system is the bit. So like cortisol, which we sometimes associate as being a bad thing, like stress thing, which again, modern society, we do make too much cortisol all day long, but we need a little bit, naturally that's what wakes us up. So our circadian rhythms at night, when we go to bed and it's dark, our cortisol is very, very low. And then as it becomes closer to daytime and light's coming in, our cortisol lifts, and that's what wakes us up actually. And so the mood light helps you feel like kind of more awake and, I guess happy, energized, is actually that pineal gland and cortisol kind of system. So unrelated to vitamin D, but it has that happy sort of effect.
Yeah.
It also is why everyone who is on their screen, on their phones late at night, that's why it affects your sleep. Yeah, because your eyes are taking in all that blue light, and it's giving you that like, I'm awake, I'm awake, I'm awake. It's messing up your brain's normal sunrise, sunset, circadian rhythm. We were meant to sleep at night. We're not a nocturnal species, we try to be. We have, and folks have all these night jobs, so that would be a way to trick, if you do have a night job and you need to be awake when it's dark because of the mood lights and lots of bright light in your eyes. Yeah, that's a good question. I wish it had
So do you have
vitamin
to
D.
look, do you have to make eye contact with the mood light for it to have its effect, or is it just, I know this isn't exactly a vitamin D question, but.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I like all the questions. Yeah, I know it's not vitamin D. It just has to be your eyes can take in light from quite a pretty wide surrounding. Yeah.
Peripherally, it's
Yeah. It doesn't need to be. Although the recommendations I've seen is like have it sit maybe while you're eating breakfast or something. Like have the mood light be like on the table with you, so you're kind of close to it. You're not like.
But it'd be pretty tough to look at it.
Yeah. No. You could be reading your paper or whatever with it like there. Yeah.
What kind of light is it? Is it just white light or?
Yeah, it's a blue light, white light, yeah, and
Blue
bright, but they're really bright. The ones I've seen are
I have a
like,
very large one on my desk.
yeah.
So it sits right there while I'm working.
Yeah.
Yes, and it makes a difference
Mhm.
for me. Yeah.
Especially wintertime, I've heard
Yes.
people say, I've used them, but not consistently enough to notice a difference. But yeah, I think they do.
Have these been around a long time or?
Yeah, fairly long, I think, yeah.
I like mine.
Blue light, yeah. Any other questions? Thank you for the ones you had.
Well, I guess the light shortage is partly because of, I think we're somewhere around 160 inches on the year. And, of course, I used to live in New Zealand, it's like this too. But the other thing I was thinking though, so if you don't get enough vitamin D, you have to check that, to check your level, right? But on the other hand, that 160 inches, we must have a lot less stress on our lungs than, I've lived in places where there was dust all over everything almost immediately. You dust it, you gotta dust these things every day.
Yeah.
Any of those desert places, a lot of those places, cities where people
Yeah.
live, and here, you do notice, you don't have to dust as much. It just doesn't layer down the way it does, and you're breathing all that.
Yeah.
And wow, I lived in an area that had mined a lot, and it was dry, it's high altitude, and it was very abrasive there, the dust.
Yeah, for the speakers, the comment in question, there's trade-offs to where you
Yeah,
live.
trade-off,
And we have,
yeah, it's weird.
one thing about
paradox there,
Southeast
yeah.
Alaska, we have amazing air quality. Yeah, very lucky for that. We've got all these trees
Yeah,
pumping
in
out
fact,
oxygen.
it's something a lot of places people lack it.
Yes, I have
to a
also
great
lived,
extent.
I've lived in places with lots of pesticides because there's an agricultural.
There's
region,
one,
yeah.
a big one, yeah, I know that
It was
one
not
too,
good.
yeah. There's certain
Yeah.
areas like that, yeah.
Yep, it is, yeah, it's a trade-off, yeah. One of our cons or low, things we need to keep in mind living here is the vitamin D. But for air, yeah, fresh air, and we've got that, yeah, we're lucky in that way. Yeah.
So in your research, have you kind of got into quantities that people should take? Because that's always
Yeah.
a tricky question as well.
It is,
How
yeah.
much to take?
Yeah, how much to take, definitely a conversation with your doctor, yeah, and that, as far as I know, or what I've seen in the research too, is changing as well, because it used to be lower, and now they're like, no, you can take 10,000 a day, I've had doctors tell me, pretty high amounts, and I think part of that is because we're not absorbing, everything we put in our mouth isn't, if it's pill form, is not really being absorbed efficiently, we end up urinating some of it out, and so that would be something to like check with your doctor, and they may even adjust you, like start you on this level and then kind of test again.
Because your eating habits are going to be a big impact of that as well.
Right, I know. I've run out of my salmon in my freezer, so it's not, we haven't quite gotten to summer yet where you get a little more salmon in, and for sure. And folks that I was talking to a gentleman earlier tonight here about a vegan diet. If you noticed, all those food sources for vitamin D are animal products. So that's really tough if you're vegan, and if you're vegan plus you live somewhere that doesn't have sunlight, or you live a lifestyle that you're indoors all the time. That can be a problem. You need to check that as well. And I think it's interesting. There's data even coming out of places I kind of mentioned, Los Angeles, California, and you think, oh my gosh, it's so sunny all the time. Huge vitamin D deficiencies in the population there, and it's just people aren't going outside the way that they used to. I think a lot of folks have jobs or lifestyles that they're indoors a lot, or they're using sunscreen and really covering up because the scare of cancer and sunburn. But
It's just so dusty and dirty, you don't want to go outside.
or the air quality and the dust and the dirt is also
The heat,
or heat is preventing you from going outside. Yeah, so even if you don't live in Ketchikan, it's worth checking with your doctor, get those vitamin D levels checked.
Any more questions? So I'm just going to pop in front and
Yeah.
say, if you're watching this, you've missed the event, but you're watching Dr. Lewis on Facebook, and you have a question, pop it into the chat, and we will be monitoring that, and we'll try to get you answers. So, don't hesitate to pop your question in the chat and Facebook.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yeah, thanks.
I remember these days.
Do you? Cod liver oil? So I actually have a source I buy from Alaska. It's from here in Alaska.